Hi everyone, it's Rachel back with the Shades of Orange, and today I'm here to bring you another recommendation video. This time I'm talking about sci-fi books with no science in them, or what I would normally describe as soft science fiction books. So just like it sounds, these are books that are very easy for beginners, but that doesn't mean that they aren't worth reading even if you are an avid science fiction fan like myself. I'm doing this as a bit of a response to my previous video where I recommended hard science fiction, and in that video I did say that I had a preference for hard science fiction, that I tend to prefer it. However, when I went to compile this list and was pulling books off my shelf, I realized that a lot of my all-time favorite science fiction books are technically very soft and they have very little focus on the science and technology, but I love them regardless. So no judgment whether you prefer one or the other, but if you're looking to get into some softer science fiction, I have some great recommendations here and I'm really excited, so let's get started. So let's start with a personal favorite of mine, and that is Faux by Ian Reid. This is set in the near future and follows a couple that live on a farm in the isolated countryside. At the beginning of the story, they receive a visit from a man who tells them that the husband needs to go away on a space mission. However, they've made arrangements so that the wife will not be left alone, and the story goes from there. Other reviewers will give away more of the plot, but personally I feel like that is all you need to know to jump into this one. I am a huge fan of Ian Reid's work, and this one kind of gets shelved as both suspense and science fiction. It has a science fiction element to it, but it's very much in the background of the story. It's a setup. You know the man is going to space, you know that it's set in a future, although not too far away perhaps, or perhaps not, and you get to follow along the story. It's very much a character-driven story. The relationship between the husband and wife is very much at the forefront of the entire setup, and I just love it. It is slow moving and it's just that little bit suspenseful because you know that something is not right. You know that there is more going on and you're just waiting for it to be revealed. You want to know why this is happening, what arrangements have been made, and the book slowly reveals that all to you, and I find it very satisfying. I would describe this book as very light in terms of a version of something like the Black Mirror TV show. Definitely not as dark, but it goes to similar places. But again, in terms of the science, there is no discussion about the space travel. None of the technology that is mentioned in this book has any sort of explanation behind it, and it's really just a backdrop for this beautiful character study. So if that intrigues you, if you like something a little bit suspenseful, if you're a huge fan of the author's debut novel, I'm Thinking of Anything, which I also highly recommend, I really encourage you to give this one a try. I thought it was lovely and poignant and just so underhyped in my opinion. I really love to see more science fiction readers pick it up because it tends to again be read by people who like mystery and horror and thrillers and all of that, but really this is a beautiful soft science fiction story at its heart. Next I want to talk about Moon of the Crested Snow by Wabashik Rice, and this is a near future post-apocalyptic story where we are following a community of First Nations in northern Canada. In the story, right at the beginning, strange things start to happen. The power goes off and it just seems like they are getting cut off from the rest of the world. All the technology is just starting to fail, and eventually you have outsiders come into the community that let them know that there is some kind of apocalyptic event that is happening, and we follow the community during this time period as they have to deal with this. They have to deal with the fact that more food may not be coming in, there aren't transports that are being shipped in, and so they need to conserve food and energy and just make plans in case this power never comes on again. And I love this story. I've said before that I really enjoy Indigenous fiction, especially when it's Canadian. I always am biased that way. And this one again is very character focused. It's very much about the community. It highlights the good and the bad aspects of any community, how people come together to help their neighbors, and also how people get selfish and make terrible choices, and you get to see all of that played out. This is of course an Own Voices story, and I thought it was beautifully written, very representative, and I loved it so much. But I need to preface that if you're someone who loves to know the why behind a post-apocalyptic event, you will be disappointed because This book is very intimate, it's very quiet, and it's very focused on the community. So there is no point in this book where someone from the outside, a scientist, comes in and says, this happened, and gives you the global explanation. There are characters that wonder and speculate throughout the way, but it's really not about the post-apocalyptic event. Instead, it is actually about the characters, and I love that. So if you are okay with the fact that you're not going to get any scientific explanation in this book, I highly recommend it. I found it to be so well written, so beautiful. It's very short. You will fly through it. And again, it's a great example of science fiction that you almost can forget is science fiction because it just puts in a little bit to set up the plot, and then the story goes from there. And yeah, this one is just beautiful. Next up, I want to talk about The Book of Strange New Things by Michelle Faber. And this is a novel that is set in a future where we have made contact with an alien species, and those aliens are requesting to have a pastor brought in because they want to learn about the Christian faith. And so the story is told primarily from the perspective of that pastor who has been chosen to go. He is married and his wife is staying behind. And so we get to see them through this long distance relationship. They're writing letters back and forth. So you also get letters from the wife telling him what is happening on Earth. And the situation on Earth is becoming progressively worse. He instead is in this new environment, this new world, and exploring and experiencing all these new things. He is getting to work with the aliens and expose them to his faith. And the story is just very quiet and anthropological. Even though it has aliens, that might scare a few people off if they're beginners, if they're again looking for very soft science fiction. Trust me, while there are aliens in the story, again, there is no talk about the space travel of how they got to that planet. There is discussions about how the aliens look and all that, but we're not getting into like alien biology or anything off-putting to those of you that don't like hard science fiction. Instead, this is very much a story about a man, his growth and change throughout this novel, and how that affects his relationship back on Earth. Because again, him and his wife are on two very different trajectories. And I understand that the author wrote this book at the time that his wife was dealing with a terminal illness, and you can really tell that in the story. It is heavy and deep and emotional and really wonderful. So if you're open to reading a story that is like this, even though it deals heavily with aspects of faith, this is not a Christian novel by any means, and I don't think that any of it was heavy-handed. It's just a perspective. The idea of a pastor going off to an alien race has been explored in other novels, but I think this is one of my favorite examples, and definitely one that is very soft in terms of the science. So definitely recommend this one. From there, I want to talk about The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood, because what good Canadian could not talk about a book like this? And this is set in a dystopian future where there are issues of fertility, where it is very difficult for women to become pregnant. And so in order to compensate this and make sure that enough children are being born, the government has enforced different rules so that women who are fertile are forced to bear the children of the more elite in society. We are told the story from the perspective of a woman who is basically owned by a man and his wife, and she is just there for the purpose of breeding children. This book is so beloved. I think everyone's heard of it, but not everyone has read it despite the TV show. And I really do encourage you to give it a try. I'm not actually the hugest fan of dystopian fiction. It's just not my favorite subgenre, but Margaret Atwood does it so well. And I know that she as an author shies away from the science fiction label. She prefers to say speculative fiction, whatever that means to her, but technically it does fall under the sci-fi label in my opinion. And I think that it's a great example of a dystopian setup, which again is more about the characters, and especially with any dystopian, I find they don't tend to have a lot of focus on science and technology. Instead, it really is just an alternative future or present that gives a possibility of something that is often very horrifying. And again, even though this book deals with infertility and all of the issues surrounding pregnancy, this book is not going to delve into scientific explanations of IVF or other fertility drugs, nothing like that. It really is just, again, the setup to create this horrifying future that unfortunately feels oh so possible, which is absolutely terrifying. From there, I want to recommend Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. And this is a literary science fiction story that follows a artificial intelligence doll that is meant to be the companion to a human. The whole story is told from this doll's perspective. And at the beginning of the story, they are in the store, and then over time it moves into a story of the girl that purchases this doll and their relationship, as well as the doll's relationship with the girl's mother. And you find out that there are reasons that this doll has been purchased, and the story moves along. And I will say that it is a bit unsettling. It feels like the author is holding back information from the reader, and you're just following along. It's very slow paced and literary. As I mentioned, the author is a beautiful writer, and it really shows through in the pages. And I will say that while this is a story all about artificial intelligence, once again, no surprise, it's in this video because there are really no explanations for the technology surrounding it. They really don't spend any time trying to explain how we got to this point, not talking about consciousness or things like that, as so many AI stories do. Instead, it really is just the setup for a story that really reflects on humanity and really is, again, about the characters. So I think, unlike a lot of other books in the subgenre of artificial intelligence, which is a subgenre I personally love, I think that this one is really great for those that are beginners, that aren't as familiar with the rules of robotics. They never get mentioned in this book. So I really recommend this one. I think it's a great entry point for the author. And I think, again, a great entry point for those that are newer to science fiction and want to dip their toes in the shallow end. And I also want to recommend Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. This is a story about a woman who has somehow the ability to time travel, and so she keeps getting pulled into the past during the age of slavery in America and keeps finding herself saving this young boy, and she is pulled back and forth between her present and the past over the course of the story. And eventually she starts to learn why this is happening and what her connection to this boy is. I like to recommend this one because in a lot of ways it reads more like historical fiction because, again, most of it takes place in the past, but because of the time travel element, it technically gets shelved as science fiction. Unsurprisingly, I really like the science fiction element to the story, but again, there's no time explaining the controversy around time travel or any kind of paradoxes. It doesn't get into that, which some time travel books do. Instead, it's really just a device to get the story into the past for the author to be able to tell the story they want to tell. It's beautifully written. I really like Octavia E. Butler's writing. I find it to be stark and straightforward, but also beautiful. She manages to make her prose just so appealing to my brain, and I really do recommend all her work, but particularly I think this one is a great starting point. I think a lot of people will consider it to be their favorite, and it definitely earns a place among the favorites on this list. And last but definitely not least, I want to recommend Invasion of the Body Snatcher by Jack Finney. This is a classic science fiction horror story that is set in what was the present day of, I believe, like the 1950s. And we are told the story from the perspective of a doctor who has various people start to visit him at the beginning of the story, telling him that their family members just do not seem like themselves. They look the same, they have the same memories, but there's something just not quite right about them, and they just can't quite explain why they feel that way. And then from there, as the story suggests, there are possibly body snatchers that are stealing people away and replacing them with some kind of duplicate. And this is a story I love to recommend because, yes, while it is technically a classic of science fiction, it has no real scientific explanations in it, and it's just this very classic, almost old-timey story. It feels dated, but in the best possible way, and you're just going along with it. It's so easy to follow. Again, I think this is one that will appeal to those of you that perhaps are more of horror readers but want to try some sci-fi. This one is a lot of fun. It's easy to get into. You will fly through it, and if you're already a fan of the movie, it's definitely worth checking out the original material. Highly recommend. And again, no science. It's just a setup for some really fun storytelling. So that is it for this video. I would love to know down below, of the books I talked about, which ones are you planning on checking out for yourself? Did you enjoy this video? Would you like me to do another video talking about hard versus soft science fiction? Don't forget to check out my other video down below on hard science fiction recommendations if you missed it when it first came out. And if you're new to my channel, consider subscribing. I do read a lot of science fiction as well as fantasy, horror, and thrillers. And I would love to hear your recommendation for your favorite soft science fiction book, aka a science fiction book without a lot of actual science in it. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, share it around online, and if you hit that little notification bell, you'll never miss a video from me. Thank you so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon. Okay, bye-bye.